morning. I did want to, certainly, I appreciate everybody being here, believe me. We grow a little bit each year. My name is Matt Bakes. I'm the owner of the Buck Stops here, that type of thing. But, you know, it's amazing to me, if any of you have known me, I've been doing this for like 24 years, 25 years. So our initial tech session was probably 8 guys standing around a transmission, and I was taking a transmission apart. And I think maybe even Mark Gerstein was there. It's very possible. But that's where this whole thing has grown to. And it's amazing because this time we rented 90 chairs. So we've used up all the chairs basically. So I appreciate everybody. I'm actually very happy that the weather held off, or that we don't have another northeaster coming through. So I was getting a little nervous on Wednesday watching the pile of snow. Thank God we got a lot of melting going on, so that helped a lot. But one thing I would be a little bit remiss if I didn't acknowledge the people that work for me. I can't do this by myself, so I'm very fortunate to have some really good people that work for me. One is Bob. Bob's our body guy. So, if you don't like the finish on your car, we have Shane. Shane's our you might as well call him a master mechanic. So if you don't like the way your car runs. And then we have Rob is a new hire for us. He's back there. He's a great mechanic. We have Joe McDonald. He helps us part-time. We have Mike Nitroy here. He's kind of like our wiring guru. He gets really all the crap right. And then we have Josh, the real tall guy that's walking around. He's the wireman, so he does British wiring for me. There he is. Josh is a little shy, so you know, you got to get him out of that bubble. So much for house is a bubble. Yeah, he's also a local fire chief, so don't stand by the door if his pager goes off. My wife Beth. One year I forgot to acknowledge her. That's you only do that once. So anyway, she does a lot of work, and I tell you what, it's well, as you can see, you know, it just takes a lot of work to get this stuff accomplished. So I appreciate all those guys, and I appreciate all you for making the trip and coming down to Triumph Rescue. It's actually humbling for me to see all you guys here, so I truly appreciate it. Now, what I was going to do was, unbeknownst to all of you, I thought I would lead into this with some kind of funny thing. So, you know how I was going to lead into this like, you know, you guys think you're here for a tech session, but we're really going to try to sell you a timeshare in Pocono. So, I don't know, I just thought that's my humor. You can shoot me later, but I just thought I got to do something. So, today we're going to talk about wiring, and you know, we all had some good stories. And if anybody has a question, please just raise your hand. There's no, you don't have to take a ticket to ask a question. So please just ask your questions. We'll stop and answer your questions. We all have wiring. I'm sure we can always talk about some kind of wiring staff that we have. I will say in the end of this whole thing is that there's no reason to think that you can't have a reliable car. You know, I just, when people tell me it's not reliable, it just always makes me think this. They can be reliable. There's just some little snafus that can happen. But Mike's going to talk about some of that today. We're also, I've got some great show and tell that we pull out of cars. That's always interesting. You know, you think at this point we've seen everything. There's no, I'm going to tell you, you've not seen everything. So it's always interesting to me to get a car in here, and you would think it would be fairly simple to diagnose and you know, I mean, these cars are similar to lawnmowers where it just really can't get any simpler. But, you know, they always smack you in the butt after a while because, you know, you can't figure it out. Why doesn't this car work? So anyway, wiring is pretty integral to what we do. So I'm going to have Mike, and I'm always, if everybody's been here before, you know I always interrupt Mike. So I would, he's pretty patient with me. But I always tell him I own the shop, so I can interrupt him. So yeah, please ask questions. He loves really hard questions too. So. Mike Detroit.
Good morning, thank you.
Oh, by the way.
All right. So as Matt said, there's no reason that our little cars can't be dependable transportation. I'll preface this by saying that whether you know it or not, the British auto industry at its peak produced something like 40% of all the automobiles and trucks built in the entire world. So if you're going to build that many, you better know what you're doing, otherwise you're going to go broke trying to fix the problems that you're making. So, you know, they must have done something right to get to that point. Now, most of the things that we're seeing these days are basically fall into three areas. Old age, we all are suffering from that problem. Wear, and not accusing anybody here, but sins of the owners or sins of the previous owners. Pretty good chance most of you are second, third, or fourth owners of the vehicles you're driving, so these cars have had lots of chances to fall into the wrong hands and have somebody do something to them that they had no business doing. So we'll go through these in kind of some order and try and point out a few things and maybe give you a couple pointers on what you can do on your own to straighten out some odds and ends. So, starting with old age. Even the newest car parked out there, there's a TR8 outside, even that car is nearly 40 years old at this point. I think it's in here, one of the issues it has is taillights aren't working.
Well, that's a mouse. Mouse invitation.
Okay, is that what it was? All right, well, anyway, you know, even the newest car being nearly 40 years old, there's lots of time in there for bad things to have happened. So we're gonna, those are some of the things we're always looking for. The biggest issue is always corrosion and dirt. I mean, the cars are driven all the time. They're subjected to all kinds of temperature changes, moisture. You all know how good seals are after 40 years. And basically, dirty connections lead to voltage drops, which eventually also leads to poor performance. In that respect, what you start seeing are things like lights that are kind of dim, batteries that are undercharged, or you have warning lights that don't want to clear, or the other extreme, overcharged batteries because the sense lines aren't making good connections, so the alternator just keeps putting out all day long. And also then, dirty connections also lead to burned connections because that resistance across that connection causes that connection to start to heat, and eventually it melts the housing and melts the wire and all the other things associated with it. The other end of that also is poor grounds. I know, for example, in the TR6, there's at least 3 different body grounds, and they're sort of scattered all over the place, and any one of those can lead to an issue. What do you got?
Hi. Hey, one thing I wanted to add.
I didn't get that.
I don't know. I just had this brain fart. The reason, and you were probably going to talk about this, but the reason Lucas, all the British car makers used to set their wiring harnesses out for bid. So Lucas would win the bid all the time. And that's the reason why we all have Lucas in our cars, because nobody could compete with them back in the day. They would give Triumph, MG, Aston, you know, all these car companies the cheapest price. And that's why And the flip side of that is, it's great because all the cars are wired the same. It doesn't matter whether you're working on an Aston Martin, Jaguar, Healy, whatever.
Certain wire colors do certain things, so you always know what you're looking at.
So,
You don't have to fish around.
so that's why we ended up with this.
Okay.
And you're gonna say that?
No, actually, thank you for filming. So anyway, back to poor grounds. The grounding issues also lead to dim lights, possible starting problems, and even poor starter performance. I had my GT6. For years, I put up with the starter just didn't feel like it was there. It was cranking, but it didn't have anything behind it. Eventually, I went out and bought a new starter, put it in, and it was still the same. And then I took everything apart and I scrubbed the interface where it bolts to the engine. That was the problem. So, you know, you don't think about that part of it, but sometimes that's what comes up as well. So, I mean, we see a lot of things like dirty light sockets, where 1 minute you tap it, the light comes on, and the next time you turn the lights on, the lights don't work again. It's like, you know, what gremlin is haunting that? These guys here, these little female connections and the little male plugs that go into them, they just get dirty, and you know that you've effectively got two connections across that, and that's two places for a failure to occur. And it doesn't take much to make those just sort of start to fall apart, or everything's in there and you jiggle it and the lights start to work again. And you know, that's the kind of stuff we're really working hard to try to avoid. Lucas was never very good at sealing switches, which works both ways. It's a problem because it doesn't keep the weather out, but it's not a problem because you take them apart, you can clean them, and you can put them back together, and they'll work just like brand new. And I don't know how many times I've done that. Even things like ignition switches. If you pry that little tab back, you can take the switch apart. Looks like that inside, right here, all these little contacts. Little buff with some Scotch-Brite, a little dielectric grease, and you got a brand new ignition switch working just like it was, just like you bought it.
Hey, you know, there's a, I'm not gonna do this all.
Okay.
There's a neat little tech tip about
Yeah,
these.
we're gonna get to that.
Oh, are you?
Back in my corner. But at any rate, yeah, probably at the end of the day, if you own the car long enough, you really ought to think that the wire harness is a consumable item, much like you would change a clutch. Maybe you'll change it once or twice in the entire time you own the vehicle, if you own it long enough, but at some point, this thing is just going to wear out. It's not really intended to last this long. I'm sure all the manufacturers of our cars would have been thrilled if we bought the car, crashed it, and went out and bought another one, because all they want to do is make cars, and they're only going to make money if you're selling them. So the more we use, the happier they are. So in a similar vein, you know, this is a consumable item. It's just going to wear out like the rest of the car will. And at some point, you just go ahead and change it out. All right, next item is wear. I would never have thought that a wire would break inside of a harness. But heavens knows I've looked at enough underneath the dashboards where the harness was all taken apart and completely messed about with in an attempt to find a problem. But we've had a couple of cars, mostly American, that rolled through here in the last few years that had broken wires in the wire harness. But it turns out it's at a point where there's always stress and motion, which is the joint where the harness goes across the door hinge, and runs the power windows and the power mirrors and the speakers and all the other jazz they stick in doors today. And what you got is the window will only go down, will never go up, but it goes up on this one. And you know, the speaker just crackles and hums over here, works fine over there, and that's that kind of stuff. And you cut that little boot open, and you open it up, and hey, look, there's 3 broken wires inside of that harness. But that's because they secure the harness so tightly at both ends that it's doing this all the time, every time you open and close the door. And eventually the conductors just snap, they just break. But we don't see a whole lot of that in British cars because there's not a whole lot of power accessories built into the door. But certainly that Stag out there with its power windows and all that other jazz, you know, power window works when the door's open. When you close the door, the power window doesn't work. So I don't understand what the problem is. It works here when we test it, but you're driving a car and the window won't go up. So those are the kinds of things we see. Also, in a similar vein, I'm sure many of you, especially TR6 owners, have gotten out of the car and leaned on the steering wheel and the horn went off. Now, that's not wearing the electrical system as such, but that's, something that makes a car act like it's haunted, because the horn doesn't work any other time normally when I push the stupid button, but when I jiggle the wheel, the horn goes off. So, again, either things that don't work, or work when they want to, or don't work when you need them to work. And the other thing we're also seeing with wear is rodent damage. Anytime I open the hood of a car and I see little rodent pellets laying around on the bulkhead, right away I'm nervous, because that means somebody's been in here and they may have been helping themselves to a free meal. Many years ago, my brother and I were involved in gray market conversion work, and my brother got a job. It was a Mercedes-Benz. The car ran when parked. They swore up and down, but it won't start now. It's only been in storage for about a year. We went through the car. It cranked all day long, made half-interested noises, but would never start. So we go back to the guy we get the car from, and he said, no, it ran when it was parked. We swear it worked great. So we take this manhole cover of an air cleaner off, and hey, there's 3 wires on a throttle position sensor that have been eaten through by a little mouse. And as soon as we tied those off, the car started instantly. So, this little mouse that we think is so cute, they love our cars because that wiring tastes real good to them. And they're not shy about using it to feather their nest or keep their teeth short or whatever else it is they do with it. So, so wear in that respect is a big problem. And then also, again, getting back to switches, it's not uncommon for these kind of things to just sort of wear out. Panel rheostats are probably the worst one. I think every one of them, even the brand new ones, are garbage because they just don't work. They don't work very well, and they don't work very well very long.
Well, also, your lights are already so dim.
Really?
Why would you want to turn them down? But that's just so. What we normally do is we'll take this rheostat and we'll just bypass it.
Put a full 12 volts to the
Yeah.
lamps, and then at least the dim lights are at least as bright as they can be.
And it's pretty simple. There's a red wire, a red wire with a white stripe. You just take those two and combine them, and then everything's working.
Okay. And down to the fun area, sins of the owners. This can be broken out into so many things, but basically, dodgy repairs, make-do repairs, modifications which the owner may have had some idea what they were doing, but not a very good one. Substandard or non-standard parts, fitting parts, made by, for example, putting a Chrysler alternator. Here we go. Putting a Chrysler alternator.
How about a cotter pin?
A what?
Putting a cotter pin in where the fuse should be.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the cotter pin in place of a circuit breaker. Yeah, that'll work real good for a while. Cobbled together repairs, poorly added modifications like lights and radios. And then incorrect connections causing burned wires. I couldn't find a wire harness, but it's not uncommon to find a wire harness where you see a wire that's sticking out all the way across the harness. And it basically was shorted at some point, and that wire heated to it. It literally became red and melted its way out of the harness. So you'll see it peeking out all the way down the harness.
That TR6 we just had.
Yeah, there was a TR6 here that had that. Somebody hooked up something wrong in the horn circuit, and basically that wire was pumping all kinds of current that it wasn't designed to handle. And there was an issue a while back with fuses that were incorrectly rated, and that wasn't helping anything at all. It might have said 35 amps, but somebody did a test where they set up a rheostat, and that meter says 60 amps had gone through that wire, and the fuse is just letting it happen. The wire is doing its job. It's protecting the fuse because it's starting to melt. And I think most of those issues have been filtered out at this point, but be aware that that's out there.
Do you want me to interrupt?
No, I'm sorry.
This is why we come, just to hear you lay out.
I drive him crazy, you know, if I didn't pay him so much, he wouldn't even be here. That's a joke.
One of the great misunderstandings is the fuse that says 35A on it is not a 35 amp fuse. It is a 17 amp continuous fuse, it's 35 amps peak, which means it will pass 35 amps for a moment, a minute or so, and then it will fade. But it's designed to pass 17 amps all day long, nice and happy. And there have been encyclopedias, entire libraries written on fuse technology. I'm even gonna, so far it's 18 levels beyond the scope of this discussion, and it's not even worth talking about. But needless to say, a fuse performance chart, you know, if it'll pass 17 amps continuously all day long, it'll pass 20 amps for an hour, it'll pass 35 for a minute, and you know, you got a curve extrapolated in between those 2 points. So you can sort of kind of figure out how long that fuse is supposed to last. But 35 amps in the United States means 35 amps, and 35 amps in England means 17 amps. So if you put a 35 in where there's supposed to be 17, things aren't going to last very long before the wire starts to come out of the harness. Some of the other sins of previous owners are things like this. I always love seeing this. There must be an entire roll of electrical tape right there. I don't know what they were trying to fix, but they sure put enough tape on it. So this is not the fix for everything. It fixes a lot of things, but also it doesn't fix things indefinitely, because the glue does have a habit of drying out, and then it just starts to come apart again. So at some point you really have to fix it the proper way. So the things we see are poorly modified harnesses, over-taped harnesses. This is not wire to be used in an automobile. This belongs in a house. So does this. My living room lamps don't do 60 miles an hour. So lamp cord doesn't count either. Automotive wire is designed for a temperature range that is, you know, beyond what you'd normally have inside of a controlled atmosphere. It's designed to be a little more abrasion resistant. It's designed to resist the chemical attacks, because gasoline and oil and antifreeze and brake fluid all have their own little their way of eating through the harness and eating through the wire insulation. So a wire is designed to tolerate a lot of that. Also, these don't belong in a car either. Wire nets have no real place in there. Because the idea is that when you join two wires, you're twisting them together. Well, in that twisting motion, you're breaking the strands off as well. So eventually, yeah, okay, I'll get it on and it'll stay. And then when I pull it, it doesn't pull out. But how many strands in that wire have you broken in the process of just doing that? This doesn't count as wiring either. It's a whole tangle up.
Oh.
I've seen this. I've seen people take scraps of wire off the floor, twist the ends together, throw a piece of tape on it, and there we go, I got a piece of wire. That doesn't count.
And you know what makes it hard too for us? Like the end user, we'll work on a customer's car, and it'll start like normal. You know, it'll be a red wire with a white tracer or something like that. And then
at the other end,
it's
entirely
different. No clue what it's
It's in this place, so it must be this, but I can't be sure.
And in between, it's like,
So use the same color.
Yeah, or the whole car is red. They've taken out all this stuff,
All that stuff.
and they've replaced it all with red wire. And by the time you get done, you're pulling out your hair because, you know, things have been changed. And it's not uncommon that, you're probably going to talk about this too, but it's not uncommon that people wouldn't take the amount of time necessary to fix it correctly, is what she's talking about, but they'll bypass
things and
so,
work on
you
that
know,
all day long.
Yeah, they'll just bypass it. So it's not uncommon to see a whole bunch of wires underneath the dashboard that really somebody try to fix the turn signals, try to fix the horn, try to fix whatever. And it can end up driving you crazy, but I don't think
No,
that's.
that's fine. Okay, sort of a note for us, we found that the schematics aren't always 100% accurate too, that doesn't help anything. But generally speaking, you get enough experience working on these things, you can usually figure out what's going on. And then the other thing, finally, along the same vein, is you find a rat's nest like this underneath the dashboard. I still don't know what all that does. I didn't even bother trying.
Was for turn signals.
That red MG out there had been in storage forever. It came in here and we started to try to figure out what was wrong with it because it had been parked for quite a while. And I put a jumper pack on what used to be a battery and started to bring the systems to life. And in about a minute, I start smelling something is cooking underneath the car. So it's like, okay, we're going to stop here. And I look underneath the dashboard in that cowling area, and I just see wires everywhere and all this kind of stuff, and connections that may or may not be doing anything. And I said, well, I could spend the rest of my life trying to figure this out, or we just replace the harness and be done with it. Car got a new wiring harness. So, you know, those sometimes you just have to pull the plug and say, look, there's nothing you can do with this. We're just going to fix it right and be done with it. So anyway, some of the fixes, some of the things that we can do, we have done here. Light sockets that always give issue. The problem is they've taken two different pieces of metal. Looks like a beryllium copper is one of the contacts that touches the lamp. And then this thing here, these little fingers that go into the socket. And they just sit against each other. There's no firm electrical contact, it's just two pieces of metal touching. Well, after a while, you get enough dirt in there, a little rust and corrosion, and they start to grow apart, and the next thing you know, the light doesn't want to work anymore. We run this through a sandblaster, clean up this interface here, and put a dot of solder on that. That light will work forever. And that's just the kind of stuff that Lucas didn't do, because obviously it would have added cost to, would have added a couple of more pennies to the cost of that wire harness, but if we do it, then it runs forever. Same thing with things like fuse boxes.
You could, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
You could say, well, why don't you just call Moss or the Roadster Factory or somebody and just buy another socket. Pretty simple. The problem is the new sockets don't necessarily work
Any better, or
any
even
better
sometimes they don't even work out of the box.
as these. So if I had a customer's TR6 in here, I would just go ahead, I'd much rather see us fix this and it'll work correctly for a long time than putting something in that the quality, I'm sure Ken can relate to this, the quality of the parts in the market today are not what they used to be. So it's not uncommon if we get a part here and it doesn't work. So you end up, yeah, or you just take forever. Good.
My turn to
Yeah, your turn.
put a turn signal put a turn signal switch in a TR6, and you've got a green wire which supplies, and you've got a green and white and green and red, and they go out to the respective circuits. I just connected up the wires without even thinking about
That's
it.
right, 'cause
And he's following the car, and every time he puts on a turn signal, he turns the opposite way. That's why I followed the wire colors.
And I didn't say anything really bad about it either. I was just like, but yeah, and like you get an overdrive switch. Now, how hard could that be? An overdrive switch has two wires on it. Well, the little guys in I shouldn't say
Wherever.
yeah, I'm gonna say that. It's backwards. So you put the switch in, and everybody's used to, okay, the stalk is up here, you're going to go down for overdrive, okay, fine, that's the way it's been for 50 years. Well, not now. Now it's the exact opposite. So what you got to do, before you put the switch in, you got to switch the wires around, then put it in the car, and then everybody's happy. Anyway.
Okay. So again, switches we can take apart. Ignition switches, light switches, there are a few odds and ends. We can take those apart, clean them, give them a nice coat of grease, put them back together, and they'll work just like brand new. Again, the sockets we've gone over. One thing we don't waste our time with are these connectors. Biggest thing is for the For the four connections, you've got a little metal contact in there, looks like a figure of 8. And it's really under a fair amount of spring pressure, and they have a habit of cracking. So when they crack, all of a sudden that connector is not tight anymore, it just kind of wiggles in there. And that may or may not work. Also, they get dirty inside, and you clean that without a file and a wire brush and a few other things. And when you start getting up to the 3, or the 6 and the 8s, all they're doing is taking two pieces and they're just putting them together. You have the same issue as you have in the light socket. So it loads up with dirt. Dirt pushes the connections apart, and things that should be grounding aren't grounding anymore, and you get the jiggle problem with the lights coming on and off. So it's a false economy to try to reuse this stuff. Whenever the opportunity presents itself, I just get new ones and throw the old ones away. And things just work much better. You're sure they're going to work. Again, Lucas having done a little bit of, taking every penny out of it they can, they don't do much to insulate the connections. So we'll also give it a little squirt of dielectric grease when we put a connection together like this, put a little dab of grease in there, push things together. That will last forever, nice and tight, nice and dry. It's not the silicone triple insulated connectors you use in the modern cars, but it's as close as we can get, and it will work for a long time without any real issues.
Probably the worst part about dielectric grease is it is just messy.
Yeah, it does tend to get all over everything. No matter how hard you try, next thing you know, everything's slipping out of your fingers because it just seems to just migrate all over everything. The other fixes are to use the proper tools. This is for doing the bullet connectors, and this is for doing the crimp connectors. And also all of the proper connectors and that sort of thing, these little guys right here. So, this is now a shameless plug for British Wiring, Josh. If I have an electrical issue, I'm not going to spend a lot of time trying to figure out what's going on. I'm just going to get the right parts, we're going to fix it right, and it's going to be fixed forever. You can do certain troubleshooting things on your own if you want to. You don't have to go out and buy a $600 True RMS multifunction Fluke automotive digital multimeter. You can get a little 4-banger or 6-banger meter from Harbor Freight for about 20 bucks, and it will do a pretty decent job. Because basically, if you can read voltage and ohms, the rest is immaterial. And even a test light is pretty good to have. We're doing simple stuff.
You bought it?
I tried to roll this out to my car.
Won't fit in your pocket. There is some discussion back and forth between soldered versus crimped connections. When you pass the wire through a bullet connector and you crimp it with this thing, if it's done right, you give it a good tug, it shouldn't pull apart. But some people like that belts and suspenders insurance of also hitting a little bit of flowing a little solder into that connection as well. The only issue I have with solder is it tends not to flow down into the hole so much as it sort of sits out on the outside. And then when you try to push the connection together, it's got to force its way in, and it doesn't fit as well as it should. But
Well, you don't have a lot of time either, because if you try to heat that bullet up to...
yeah. You're going to start melting. You're chasing. You heat the bullet, and it starts to heat the wire, which begins to melt the insulation. The next thing you know, you're chasing the bullet down the wire, and the insulation is piling up behind it. So, solder joint, yes, can be very good, but it can also be a little problematic. Okay, so, in conclusion, there are no reason that the electrics in your cars can't work just the way it should, just the way the designer intended it to work the day it was put together. It may require a little bit of sorting out on your part, but it can be done. Some of the big things are the improvement of grounds. When we clean a ground connection, always like to use one of these guys, a little internal tooth lock washer or even external tooth lock washers. Because when you wind down on that nut to make that connection, that tooth will bite through the paint and you'll get a good solid interface to that ground. Improvement of connections using some dielectric grease. Anything that tries to keep the weather out and keep the dirt out, that's going to get the job done. Always trying to use the proper parts and materials. We'll adapt things when we absolutely have to, when there's no good alternative. And we'll still go to great lengths to try to make sure that it's right and as right as we can get it. But if possible, we'll always try to get the right thing that belongs on there. Kind of a note for any of you guys who are working on these things. When you're removing or replacing a harness, take pictures, because routing the harness is very important. It was designed to go a certain way, and if you flipped it over or ran in a different direction, or went over something that was not accounted for, like a sharp edge, it's going to be not too long before you're damaged your shiny new harness.
Hey, the other thing is, when he was talking about taking pictures, a lot of us are going to do this part-time. I mean, we do it full-time here, but a lot of us take this car apart, and of course, we all know a car comes apart in like 2 days. But
No, it's more like 20 minutes, isn't it?
yeah, it can be. Usually solves all. If this thing's going to go on all winter, or it's going to go on for a year, or however long it's going to take you to put this car back together, I just saw him laughing. So, I'm guilty too. Don't get me wrong. The shoemaker's kids never have shoes, but it's a great idea to take pictures, and that way you can go back. And with the digital camera today, it's awesome. I mean, you just you can click a million pictures in no time. But 6 months from now, a year from now, whenever you get time to finally put this thing back together, you have the pictures, and you just bring them up, and you go, oh, that's how it went. And believe it or not, we take a ton of pictures here. One thing, if Mike's going to take something apart, Joe might have to put it back together. So, we always take a ton of pictures here. Every customer has I don't want to bore you, but every customer has a folder, and we just stick all these pictures in the folder. But it's one way for us to control things, but it's a great idea, and it's so much simpler today to rattle off.
Yeah.
Half a dozen.
Yeah, there's almost no excuse for getting it wrong.
Well,
Almost.
is this just one?
This one. Okay. And a last couple of points. At some point, when you get down to, when it starts to look like this, maybe just think about replacing it. It's cheap insurance at the end of the day. And as far as doing upgrades and so on, better lights, driving lights, radios, alarm systems, that sort of thing, always a good idea to fit a relay. They're fairly cheap, they're easy to wire, you can hide them just about anywhere. I buried a whole bank of them under the dashboard of my Stag. I don't even know they're there anymore.
And all that information is readily available.
Yeah.
So it's not like,
There's no rocket science here, really. And you can even buy kits. I know Moss Motors sells a kit to do relay conversion for headlights. And basically, you wire them right out front. It's 2 relays. And the wires that would normally go out to the headlights now just go to the relay coils instead. And the only wire you have to run is a hot lead off the starter so that you have a good solid 12 volts to work from. And you've got nice, beautiful, bright, shiny headlights for the rest of your life. And finally, these kind of little junky little bits too, which are so important to doing the job right. You can certainly buy them from us, or you can build them on your own. So. Any questions? Yes?
Yeah, how do you keep the mindset up?
A cat? I do 2 things. Now, I don't know where they come into my garage, but I will set a trap near the car, and I'll also put poison around the car. That way, I get the mouse. If you poison the little bugger, you're not sure you got him. But if you pick him up and he's stuck in the trap, you got him. Yeah. Yes.
What I've used in the past for my car over the winter, I put mothballs.
Yeah, that's what they say.
There's
Eggs of mothballs.
at the hardware store, there's a little tiny camper bag. I think you get 6 or 8 of them you can buy. I always had problems.
There are a couple of things you can use to keep.
Put them in there, and they're very easy to put in. They last like 6 months. You
Yeah.
take them out, you throw them in.
I also heard that mint keeps them out too, and that's not better than mothballs.
In mint?
There's also little gadgets you can buy to plug in.
Yeah.
that emit,
Yeah, the ultrasonic, yeah.
ultrasonic, that's a deterrent.
I don't know if they work, because you can't hear them. Yes?
The ultrasonic will not, if you have it around with different outlets, it doesn't pass through the car. So you have to have something in the car.
Yeah, okay.
Extension cord, throw one in the
Okay.
cockpit. If they have battery operated ones, you can buy it, put underneath the hood. Right?
Yeah, and unfortunately, when it comes to rodents, you really can't, you can do your best, but, you know, I had my car in the garage, and it's the middle of summer. And I had cleaned the car, we were ready to go to a car show, I back it out of the garage, it's like, what is all this stuff on the floor? Well, a mouse, in the 2 days between I had cleaned it and got the car ready to leave, a mouse got in and ate the back seat. I didn't eat a lot of it, but I see all these little bits of fuzz in the back seat on the carpet. And I lift up the seat and, yeah, the little bugger chewed a channel through it about that long.
You know, ultimately, I think it boils down to,
Yeah,
you want me to go? Or?
go ahead, you.
He chose wisely. It's so hard to keep mice out of the car, as we all know. So I don't know whether there's one foolproof way. Everybody has an idea, but we've tried Cab Fresh. There's this stuff that smells like cedar or something like that. Dryer sheets, mothballs, everything to try to get Mickey out of the car, and it's very hard. So I think maybe just being vigilant may make as much difference as anything else, because little guys are looking for a home, and if you're not using your car, I mean, that's a perfect home. Plus they get to eat well. Plus they get to eat and but yeah, it can be extremely hard to keep that.
Yes?
One thing from an insurance standpoint with wiring, I talk to different people and they don't realize that if you have fairly significant melting in your wires, in the wiring in your car, that is considered a fire. If you make a claim to your insurance company, there should be no deductible. It's a comprehensive loss. It's not going to be a chargeable loss. And if you get your car, if you have a problem, say the voltage regulator takes a crap and it melts wires. Well, they don't owe you for the voltage regulator, but they owe you for the wires and any subsequent damage. My point is that you should, I hear guys all the time say, oh, well, I fixed it myself, I didn't do this, I didn't do that. I would suggest, and coming from, I was a claims manager, I was only too happy to have the car taken to a place like this or another good restoration shop or whatever that could fix the car, know that it was fixed when it was done, because I saw too many times where people took it to somebody that was half-assed, and then the whole thing gets convoluted. You don't know where this guy started, the other guy ended. I'm just telling you, and I'm retired now, I got no skin in the game at all, but if you have significant damage to wires, get the car to some place that knows what they're doing, and the insurance company, if they're legit, should be only too happy to pay to have the car either put a new harness in it in the case of one of these cars. I mean, a new Mercedes-Benz, if we had a it was totaled, the car was done. You're not going to go back. But one of these cars, any insurance company worth their salt should be only too happy to fix the damage and make sure it's done from A to Z, and then the issue's done.
Now you tell us.
Yeah.
So you just, let me just follow up on it. So you just call your insurance company and say, I had a small fire in my wiring harness, I've got an estimate for repair and replacement.
Now you tell them I have a claim, I have melted wires, my car won't run. And I would like it taken to Joe's Balloon or Triumph Rescue or whatever, and they can either come and look at it there or go to you. It's better if you take the car. I'm kind of going against what I used to like, because you take it to some shops and it's like it becomes a federal case. But if you take it to a legitimate shop, that way that shop owner can explain to the insurance adjuster using his experience, this is what I gotta do. And it was always my experience, if I trusted the guy, I would say, just give me the estimate, we know it's gonna be done right and done. But
Did you guys know that?
I don't personally like dealing with insurance companies. I'll be very honest, I never had any luck, and I'm not gonna go into any detail, but.
I just have a question for you. You know the situation with the 8, but it has been gone through so many hands. I didn't go to the insurance company because I was afraid since it's
you
been,
gotta have a sudden and accidental loss, so
Oh, okay.
all this progression's not gonna work. If you
Okay.
have a sudden and accidental loss,
okay.
sorry, God, I understand the insurance companies are always, but from my standpoint, I always liked it when it was in a legit place and it was a done deal.
Okay. Ed has a.
Yes.
Go ahead.
I want to pass on an experience I had this winter with my battery maintainers, which I've used for more than 10 years without incident. But this year I had a battery explode on me, and boy, when they go, there's battery everywhere in your garage. And from my research on what might have happened, I think that it's because the water level might have gone below the level of the plates, and the plates on modern batteries are very close together, so that once the water gets a little bit below, there can be arcing between those plates, and when that arcing occurs, that hydrogen gas inside there can go kaboom. So if you're using a battery maintainer, make sure you're checking that the water level is above the plates, else, you know, it's a freaking mess when those batteries go.
Check those one car right away.
It's like a bomb.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I had the experience where I went to start the car, and I noticed a wisp, a white wisp of smoke coming off the front carburetor. And what it was the manual choke somehow was grounding out. Have you ever experienced something like that? And
Oh,
have
yeah.
any idea how that might be?
I was working on a TR3 one day, and the choke cable had become the ground for the car. And I didn't realize it until my arm came in contact with the choke cable. I'm like, why the hell is that hot? You know, that should not be hot. I didn't even run the car. And I ended up, actually, I didn't really burn myself, but it got my attention pretty quick. And it was just the fact, as Mike was saying, you know, the path of the electrics, you know, grounds, making sure the grounds are good on your car are essential. And that's all it was doing. You know, the car couldn't, that's the only way the car could manage was to make that cable the ground.
Yeah, it found a way back to the battery eventually.
Yeah, and it's gonna do what it has to do to do
I
that.
did see where it passed through the firewall, the casing on the cable was chafed there.
Yeah, that was your ground. They found it. Yeah.
You know, I have done accessory wiring for lighting, and wrapping it with the non-adhesive British wiring cable wrap is an interesting start, but the finish is nearly impossible. Is there a technique for getting to that?
If you really studied what they did, they'd get to the end and put 1 or 2 turns with black tape. That's it.
Okay.
So, you know, 2 inches, an inch of black tape, and that's your last turn. And it keeps it all together.
There could be just a slight bit of.
And it might even be actually, yeah, or even, I've even seen shrink tube.
But I don't know, that's a very good question. And you know, if you take a look at a typical harness, it might have any unknown total of ends to it. But there's got to be some little, did you see a mouse?
No.
I think that there would have to be either maybe just a little bit of adhesive on that or something to make it.
I'm trying to get them hiding it under, you know, like.
It's almost impossible. I mean, because it's actually the friction of that. It's not friction tape, but it's the friction of that.
Yeah,
You put on there.
I think they wind it with, they use some type of a machine to wind it.
Oh,
I'm
it's
not
a-
exactly sure how it works.
It's a shoeless machine.
Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Okay.
And OSHA would never let you do that over here, believe me. Because this poor guy's sitting on a chair and he's got his hands holding, he's feeding the harness through it's a tape machine, and the thing goes around like this, and this poor guy
It's like a braider.
is sitting there putting the wire harness through this. I can't, well, you can only imagine what this thing is, but it goes down through, the tape's going around at like 1,000,000 miles an hour, and he's trying to feed the machine, feed the wiring harness down through there. And, same thing with the braiding that's on the outside of the cars. If you have a cloth-covered harness, that guy sits in a chair too, and there must be, because, if you have a Healy, if you have other cars that have a tracer in the original braided cover, they have this, Autosparks has this room, and it's on the second floor, and this guy's on the first floor. So he might have 7 strands of wire coming to this machine, and this poor guy's got his hands in here, and he's feeding this harness through here, and it's amazing to me how they can get the tracer and the black.
Yeah, I've seen braiding machines run. They're whirling dervishes because they're groups that are spinning, and then the whole mess is going around. And you're trying to follow this wire, and it's like, but it's really quite something, and that's how this would be made. Yeah.
My brother worked in the Air Force on jet fighters, and they would recondition them. And he introduced me to a tape that you can find in a hardware store and also in like Advanced Auto. It's silicone tape. It looks like friction tape, except it's kind of like fat in the middle with a thread going through it. And you put it on real tight, you tighten it up, and it melts into itself. And there's no way it can ever come apart again. It's just sealed, it becomes solid, pumped with rubber. And I've used it on different things, and it really works. And if you pull it real tight and stretch it thin and then just pinch it, it just melts into itself, and it's a solid connector.
One thing I do want to say real quick, and this is not a shameless plug for British Wiring. They sell these books all over. But this manual, Dan Masters was the one that put this together. But having a book like this, sometimes, as Mike alluded to before, the factory schematic for these wiring harnesses isn't perfect.
Yeah, I can't find the trunk wire on this one. I don't know where the trunk light is on it.
And Josh answers these questions all the time, but this book here, even though it's supposed to be for a Triumph, it was designed to be for a TR250 and Triumph TR6, but because all the cars are wired basically the same, anything in here you can use for an MGB, you can use for Austin Healy, you can use for even an Aston Martin. It doesn't really matter, but because they use the same wires to wire everything, a good book is worth its weight. So.
Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, an experience. Back in 1980, when TR8s were brand new, I had a friend that bought a new one, and he had his cassette tapes, which no one uses anymore, in the glove box, and they kept getting erased. And we figured it out. The battery on a TR8 is in the trunk, and the starter wire comes up along the right-hand side of the glove box, and he had his tapes in there, and when he cranked the car, the magnetic field from the wire replaced it. Just saying, you heard it all, and here's another one.
Yeah.
One thing I did want to touch on was, and maybe Mike can give me a hand, we do talk about, if anybody else has any questions about wiring, it's no problem. I thought we'd kind of morph into maybe some maintenance stuff, and we're all going to get our cars out of storage soon. If they're not out already, hopefully it's going to stop snowing, and we can get some use out of our cars. But I brought some show and tell along, and you guys may have seen this already, but this is, this bag here contains, we had a customer come in, just some funny stories. We had a customer come in, and it looks like I just skinned a deer, but, we had a customer come in and was having an issue with his, car was running out of gas all the time. Okay, fine, how crazy could that be? Well, somebody had lined his gas tank with that stuff you buy at, I'm not gonna name names, but, a gas tank sealer. So, the gas tank sealer, the gas tank was never prepped correctly. So, unbeknownst to him, this stuff was, and when I pulled this out of the gas tank, you know how, gas tank opening's only like that. So this was so pliable that I was able to pull it out of the filler of a gas tank. And
Was it all stuck on side?
it had all, so they put it in, they took the gas tank out, you're supposed to clean it real good, etch it, whatever you're supposed to do. Then you flip the tank around and come try with this solution in there, and it's supposed to adhere to the sides of the tank. Well, it never attached itself. So when he put gas in it, it released. And this was floating, it was like a bag. It was like a bag inside the gas tank. So when you do self-repairs, just make sure that and I don't even know whether following the directions is 100% gonna make it work or not, but it amazed me when I pulled this out of the gas tank. I was like, you gotta be kidding me. So, just a simple thing, you're gonna coat your gas tank, you wanna make it last forever, which is a great idea, but, you gotta make sure it's done correctly. And it's amazing when you think about this came out of a TR3 gas tank, so it was pretty good. We had a guy, let's see. This is a typical TR6 downpipe gasket. Well, the downpipe gasket is supposed to go on one way. It's designed to have the holes match up when you put it on. Well, he put it on the opposite direction, and the car came in and it wasn't really running correctly. It took us forever to find out that he didn't put the gasket in there, right? So that was pretty.
Now, to be fair, it would fit either way.
Yes,
So unless you were paying attention, it was very easy to put it in the hole.
It's a square. It's a square. What else do I have? Show and tell boxes are great. And it's funny because I say this stuff and I'm like, yeah, nobody's really going to be interested in it. But in the end, it's fun. A lot of our cars have plastic fuel floats for our sending units. Well, these things notoriously get holes in them. So it's not uncommon that we have a customer come in, we'll talk about his fuel gauge doesn't work, and of course we sick Mike on it because now it's an electrical issue. And lo and behold, the float has a hole in it, and it doesn't float, if it's got gas in it. So
somehow the gas, perfectly fine, you just sit it on the countertop and you'll start to see a little moisture stain grow around it. Somehow it found a pinhole and filled up with gas.
It's the way they have, like this old one, this one came out of that TV.
Yeah.
And of course, this is never going to work because it's frozen, the thing was never used. But where this one has a metal can attached to it, and I mean, it's rare, but once in a while these things can have a problem. But obviously, if the arm doesn't move, it's not going to work. But what I'm getting at is these attach with a piece of wire, a hooked piece of wire that goes around there, and it ends up just poking a hole in there, and then they don't float anymore. So that's what else do I have here? Oh, this is a good one. And some of you guys have been here before. You've probably seen this already, so I don't want to. It always fascinates me. We had a guy come in. This came out of a trial. So this is a clutch. And the guy came in and he says, my car won't move, and you got to give me a hand. And I'm like, okay, well let's figure it out. So obviously the car wasn't going to move, but he did drive it up to a certain point, and I'm like, how? Yeah. He got out of this. Now, I mean, a bunch of us probably have daughters, and when you put a daughter in a car, she doesn't hear anything. I mean, the tires could fall off the car. It wouldn't matter. They're just going to drive. They're going to use it as a closet. They're going to keep driving. Well, this always amazes me how we get stuff in here. And, you know, when you take it off and you get the transmission out, you're looking at this stuff, yeah, you're like, wow, that's awesome. We have a bag in here. And some of this stuff, we do a bunch of overdrive work too, but this is the brake ring. This is what actually makes your overdrive work. The clutch in the back of the overdrive bites into this brake ring, and that's what gives you that overdrive. Well, this thing is cracked, and you know, we don't see that very often, but this ended up having to rebuild this transmission for another reason, but sometimes this is what you find. I mean, things are just, and I think what Mike said before about age, you know, none of this stuff, it was supposed to last forever. When these guys were putting these cars together, you know, they wouldn't have never dreamed that we'd be standing here 60,
Still driving them 60
you know,
years on.
and, you know, the overdrive doesn't change very much, so, I mean, this, oh, I was rebuilding another trans story. I was rebuilding a transmission, and you guys can't really see this, but this is a drill bit. And I guess it's, what size would you say it is?
That's almost half inch.
That's almost half inch. This was in the transmission when I took it apart. And, you know, yeah, when you think about, I mean, what could be in the bottom of a transmission? And you're thinking to yourself, well, so anyway, yeah, I pulled the top off, I took all the parts out of the transmission, I'm looking in there, I'm like, holy crap, how? And it had nobody drilled a hole in this. You know, a lot of times you see a transmission that somebody has tried to free up the clutch, and it's notoriously that they drill a hole in the bell housing, and they try to stick something up in there and break this free of the pressure plate or clutch, you know, the pressure plate, the flywheel or pressure plate. So anyway, I take this apart, and lo and behold, there's a drill bit a broken drill bit in there, and I think ultimately what happened is this didn't make the transmission very happy, but it didn't, that wasn't the root of the problem, but you know, you don't expect to find this stuff. And this is just talking about maintenance issues. We have a great picture. I mean, you guys won't be able to see this, but we take out spark plugs that, and I'm a firm believer in what came in the car tends to work best in the car. And not that, I mean, there's a bazillion different spark plugs out for your car, but this is one of these. Oh man, what is-
Tri-powers or?
yeah, it's got like so many different.
Yeah, tri-power.
I'd have to take off my glasses to count them. But you know, to me, if you're talking about a Triumph, a Champion spark plug seems to work the best. You know, but we find all sorts of stuff. But what I'm getting at is the insulator's not supposed to turn. so you know, but this is the stuff we find, and you know, I'm a firm believer in preventative maintenance, and I think, you know, we really need to look at our cars, certainly in the spring, before we get our cars out and start to drive these things around. It's really imperative that we take a look at this stuff. And I can be anal about this stuff to some degree, but I think, like the ethanol fuel that we're all forced to use, I mean, some of us are fortunate to have a non-ethanol gas station near us, and I think that's great, but eventually you're going to have to put ethanol gas in your car. Ethanol is just probably the worst thing I can ever imagine somebody having, and we were never designed to burn corn in a car. It's just not right, period, as far as I'm concerned. But I can understand saving the environment and all that stuff, but the car just doesn't react well to that fuel. And if you flip, I mean, we all probably have a chainsaw, we all have lawnmowers at the house, we all have all this stuff, even if you have an outboard motor. It used to work great one year, now it doesn't work at all. So ethanol is probably, it's probably not our most prevalent complaint, but it's probably up there to some extent that most of the cars that come in here, we end up draining a lot of fuel out of cars because the fuel just loses its pizzazz in like 30 days or?
30 days is going to be the shelf life for modern products.
So you really have to be careful, and I don't, but we got into a conversation probably the last time we had you guys over here, that I shouldn't say it this way, Mike, there's two rules of thought. One is to fill your gas tank up before you park the car. One is to kind of not fill your car up before you park the car for the season. I kind of like the idea of not filling up the car before you park it, because then in the spring you put fresh gas in it and you're ready to go. Fill the car up, let it sit for 6 months. Now you've got a tank full of like so-so gas. Go ahead, Mark.
There's a Wawa in Allentown where all the gas pumps have 3 nozzles: diesel, gasohol, and unleaded gasoline.
It's in Dorney.
Oh, Dorney, okay.
Yeah, and apparently they get enough people there with small engines that it was worth an empty pump. So it might pay for everybody, check Wawas that are near you, and especially if you're living in a rural area. They may be doing that, you know, around, but you can get unleaded. Now, it's not real high octane stuff. Not like you gotta add octane boost. Yeah, but at least you can get unleaded gas.
Hold on, Rick. What's that? Yeah, there is a website.
Website, all your local stations are.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
But the higher octane non-ethanol is in the gas station across the street from the entrance to the airport, on Airport Road.
Right, yeah, Sunoco station.
Right.
Oh, is that?
And they have aircraft still too.
Oh, wow.
I have a question about, we were talking about electrical, the overdrive transmissions. Constantly, I'd like to hear your take on it. Do we flip the switch without putting the clutch in, or do we clutch and flip the switch?
It's really, I mean, to me, it's a preference. The transmission doesn't matter. It doesn't care how you do it. But I have a tendency to use the clutch when I shift into overdrive. It's just a way to make it, I mean, certainly if you have an A-type overdrive, it bangs in the gear. I mean, it's very aggressive, and but the J's are different. The J, maybe even the D-types are a little bit less aggressive. So they have a J has a tendency, let's say, to kind of go woo, you know. But an A-type, I mean, it lets you know you're in overdrive.
So that helps to accommodate the difference.
Yeah, it's really, if you don't, certainly it doesn't hurt it if you don't, but if you want to kind of make it a little bit less noticeable when you're shifting, because certainly the earlier cars you could do it in second, third, and fourth, and that's the last thing that you want to bang that thing around after the time. So, but that's my take on it. Go ahead.
Well, I tend to agree with you, but you know, if you shoot in overdrive and you think, oh, I don't want to replace the 2 joints that's legal, then you use the clutch.
Yeah,
And it also depends on what weight of oil you have in the overdrive. And, you know, yeah, it can really bang when you join by the side. If I keep doing that.
yeah, it's funny how they put the same. They put the same overdrive, let's say if you have an earlier car that's got an A-type overdrive. They put the same, that overdrive is basically the same in just about any car. So, but they all recommend different oil. So it's kind of weird how, you know, some guys like 80W90, some like the MGBs, I think they went like 30 weight or something like that. So, and I don't know this costume, so I'm not going to stand here and try to describe all that stuff, but it's kind of odd how they have the same mechanisms, but they offer different. We have, is there some other, we're just going to talk about maintenance real quick. I'm going to give my wife a chance to, get lunch together. We have, we certainly have a lot of stories about repairs that have gone wrong. Hopefully we have a lot of repairs that have gone right. But I think in the long run, you want to just keep track of all that stuff, maybe establish some kind of track record put your stuff in a folder so you know. We normally, I tend to talk about fire extinguishers to death, and I promise not to do it this year, but having a fire extinguisher in your car, I think is a great idea. And if nothing else, you can just get in the mindset that says, well, I'm going to use it on my neighbor's car. I'm not going to use it on my car. But having a good extinguisher is I think is a great idea. And not that you want to dive into it, but there's really two different styles that we would use in our cars. There's going to be a dry chemical, which is, I don't like them. They're readily, everybody sells them. They're very inexpensive. For $30 you can get a dry chem, and it'll do, basically takes the oxygen away, so it smothers the fire. But long story short, it's corrosive. So you want to be very careful using a dry chem. If that's what you have, that's what you're going to use, and you're going to put the fire out. There's a fire extinguisher on the market today. It's called Halotron. It's a rendition of the Halon, which they don't like to sell anymore because it drives the ozone crazy. But it's a clean agent. It will put the car out. It will not leave any residue, and it gets the job done. And to me, I would think that would be, they're more expensive. They're probably triple the cost of what a dry chem, if you can buy it, probably more than that, but if you can buy a dry chem 2.5 pound for $30, you're going to spend $150 or so on a Halon. But they work great. They don't cause any issues with anything, and there's no cleanup. So to me, a fire extinguisher is worth, because all of our cars, that's the other thing I was going to talk about. We just talked about insurance. Well, go ahead.
Just a point, the Kitty, or KIDDLE brand, that has a major recall on their fire extinguishers. So if you have one, go online and check out your model. I just got 2 replaced for nothing from them.
And that's a good idea, because the other thing is they don't last forever. Even though, some of them have a gauge, some of the lesser ones, the less expensive ones don't have a gauge. And you really don't have a clue until you really have to go use it. Well, that's not the time that you want to figure out this year. So anyway, long story short, I think just spending a little bit of extra money, whether you get, it doesn't matter the brand. I'm not going to really try to sell a brand, but just having a good fire extinguisher, checking it, it's like checking your oil, it's like checking your spark plugs, tuning up your car maybe once a year, changing the oil once a year. It's just a good idea to do that. Yes?
What's the minimum size you would want to have for your car?
More is always better in my mind. So if you look at the back of Beth's car, I have a 5-pound Halon fire extinguisher, which is, it's crazy, but I've been a volunteer firefighter for the last 25 years, and I'm not going to go enter a battle unless I have plenty of stuff. So the bottom line is, the Moss sells, and we also carry it too, but there's a 1.4 pound small Halon that works very well. You can certainly, a 2.5 pound is a great little size. I wouldn't want to get anything less, certainly in a dry chem, of anything less than a 2.5 pound. But that's, if you can get 2, because, really, I don't see, I get off on a tangent. I'm like him letting the smoke out of the wires. You only have so much discharge time. So if you're talking about, even a 5-pound fire extinguisher will probably won't even give you 15 seconds of discharge time. So that 2.5 pound fire extinguisher is going to give you maybe 6 seconds of discharge time. So what you want to do, and here again, I go off on a tangent, you want to make sure you take a breath, point it in the right direction, and just give it a quick knock. And don't try to put the whole car out. Just try to knock the fire down and figure out what's going on, and then hit it again. So that's what I'm saying. You get in a rush. Good.
Where should they be placed in the car?
Where you can reach them.
in the truck.
And it sounds easy. A lot of people put them in the trunk. You know my wife's car? It's in the trunk. But, you know, it's her car. Really, I suggest putting any place that you can reach in would be the best. So maybe behind the seat, maybe next to the seat, maybe in front of the seat. You know, it doesn't. What's that?
The bracket.
Oh, we have a bracket out there you can take a look at that Mike had made up for putting a fire extinguisher on the front of like it could work on a TR4, TR6, TR50, something like that. But the main thing is to just make sure you have it accessible. It has to be, you have to be able to reach it. Your trunk could be locked. So you
Fire could be in the trunk.
Yeah. So you're having a meltdown about your car on fire. Next thing you know,
You're panicking and not thinking straight.
yeah,
You get the key.
you're trying to call 911 and talk to dispatch. Right. You go around here trying to call where's my fire station. So I would think anywhere that's close would be great. So we went over that, and I promise not to talk anymore about that. We went over the electrical, just driveline. I can't, a lot of the new stuff they sell today doesn't have grease fittings on it, but I'm a good proponent about putting grease in these cars. So I would try to make sure the car is greased. I'd like to see the oil changed every year, possible tune-up. Just looking through my notes here. Certainly, anything. We talked about the parts quality that are on the market today, and the problems that we have here. We had a customer. We were in the middle of. We were putting. He wanted the pistons replaced in his car. This is kind of an odd story, but I'm not going to go through the whole thing. So we were doing kind of like an in-chassis overhaul, which I don't really recommend, but we did it this time. And it failed. I mean, the guy's happy with his car. Everything worked well. But what happened is we ordered 6 pistons. And you wouldn't think there'd be a big deal about buying 6 pistons. You just call up Moss, whoever has them. You get the pistons here. Well, 4 were wrong out of the 6. They would not fit in the cylinder, in the bore. So you go through all this, you're doing, and these are, I think we put standard pistons back in here. So we bought 6 standard pistons, 4 did not work. So I call up my salesman, and he's like, he doesn't believe me because now I've just told him that, hey, I bought these 4 pistons, they won't go in the bore, and I'm going to send them back. So it's just that whole thing about, you think you're going to do something quick and easy, and it never works. Maybe one of the other things is some of the problems we see here are, and I wouldn't limit anybody to working on their car, but some people are definitely meant to work in their car, and some people are not meant to work in their car. We see a lot of things that people will bring their cars back, probably on a tow truck, but they'll bring their cars in and they'll give us a quick spiel about, well, I was trying to do this, this, and that. I'm not comfortable with the way it turned out, and hey, could you guys take a look at the car and try to figure out what's going on? So you get the car in here and you just go through everything and you notice that things aren't right and you fix it. But I guess what I'm getting at is it may be less stress on everybody's part if you think you're going to tackle something on your car and you're not quite familiar with it, maybe just call somebody that does this stuff full time and do that. Let's see, leaks. Oh man, leaks. Yeah. I don't really know what's the best way to, obviously we all, probably the best thing to do is just look at the floor when you move your car. We all have, all of our cars leak. It's very hard to get a car that doesn't leak. I've tried, and it can be tough. But there's there's nothing wrong with backing your car out, maybe just taking a quick glance at the floor and see, making sure there's no, we're gonna have oil spots, but just make sure there's no brake fluid on the floor, make sure if there's antifreeze on the floor, or what have you, just double check that before you go on your drive. You wanna check on Beth and see if she is, I hate to lose my sidekick, but I'm gonna check. Does anybody have any questions about, go ahead, Peter.
To go back to the overdrive,
Yeah,
I use mine as a fifth gear.
yeah.
What's the advantage to using it on the lower gears?
I think, to me, I just get a kick out of it. There's no real, the kick you're gonna use, because my wife's got a TR4, it was basically set up in the factory to use it in second, third, and fourth.
Yes.
A lot of our cars may only be third and fourth, but, so, to me, I just get a kick out of it. I just, it's fun just to go through, and, I feel like I'm a truck driver again, and I'm going through the 13 speed, and doing that. But there is no, one second, I had a customer that drove me crazy, but I shouldn't say that. But, just one, probably. I only have one customer that drives me crazy. Well, he had a TR3, and he would constantly put his car in overdrive to save gas. So he would be driving around and lugging the crap out of the car, and the car does not like that. They don't like, all of our cars have a certain, it's kind of, they all have a sweet spot, and it's nice to keep the car in that general power band, RPM range, and they like that, But he used to drive around in like 10 miles an hour and put the thing in overdrive. Because he thought he was squeezing out like another gallon or so. We're talking about TR. I mean, it's, how much, what do you think it's going to actually get in the one week? But anyway, so it's just a preference. And I don't know, it's kind of, I do use it from time to time in third gear, I'll put it in overdrive. If I'm in a traffic situation, I can just bring it in and out of overdrive and maybe not use the transmission, not use the clutch. But I don't know, it's just one of those goofy things that, okay, I'll just go here. You got a question?
I had a TR4 with overdrive, and going up the hill, watching Glen on the way to Seneca Lot. Second is too low and third is too high, and second overdrive is perfect.
Oh yeah, see, there you go.
That's why you do it.
Yeah.
How do you recommend disposing of that bad gas you drain out of the tank?
Give it to him.
It's a definite problem. I have a 55-gallon drum here that Safety Clean comes and takes. It's expensive for me to do that, but I mean, we just...
You got room for my gallon and a half?
Yeah, it costs, this is gonna sound crazy, it costs us like $15 a gallon to get rid of it. Yeah, so it's kind of, it's bad in that sense, but I mean, we get cars in here, I mean, what would I ever do with all this bad gas? Because it gets crazy after a while, but you gotta do something with it.
Would the local fire department have some advice?
Once in a while, the local fire department may put on a display of using a fire extinguisher or some training, and they need a little bit of oomph to get something started. That may be a possibility, but then, they have the burden of storing it and so forth and so on. So I wouldn't want to see us do it. But back in the day, you might have been able to put that in a tractor or something that had very low compression that could just make it work. But today, I wouldn't want to put that stuff in anything. I've been including a stag, but had to get one more. That's what they ready. Pete, good.
Do you recommend any fuel stabilizers?
Always.
It's.
Yeah, that's the answer, always.
Yeah, okay.
I think some of it is like snake oil to some degree, in that, this stuff is, you're supposed to put it in your gas tank, and some people swear by it, some people don't. We use it here, and And I don't know 100% whether it actually really works in the scheme of things. I'm sure it does something, but you know, it's frustrating for me. Go ahead.
How appropriate is the adage, you use it or lose it when it comes to using the electric overdrive?
It
Does
doesn't
it matter?
doesn't matter at all.
Okay.
It has no effect on, but I will say, I think what we see here a lot is, if you take that one step further, is people don't use their cars enough. And that's one of the, we fix a lot of cars here for people that don't use them. And it's a shame. I mean, we all, to not use your cars, and I mean, I'm guilty because I'm too damn busy, but a lot of the cars that come in here just aren't used enough. And you know, the gas goes bad, the brakes go bad, and they need to be exercised.
Well, okay, in that line, if you can't take your car off because the roads are salty or they're
Yeah.
wet, is it worth it to start it up and idle it for 20 minutes? Seems to me it would load up your spark plug.
There's probably different, everybody's got an opinion about that. And I'm sure Mike and I probably wouldn't agree. But I think it could actually do more harm than good. And what I'm thinking of is the moisture that generates. And you know, it's moisture in the block, it's moisture in the exhaust. You know, some of us by now probably have stainless steel exhaust systems, which aren't really going to matter, but it's the residual effect of that, you know, that might be counterproductive. I'm sure the car will like it, you know, to get started.
The idea that you're driving it, you're using the brakes, you're pumping the brakes, you're turning the wheel. You know,
It's just, you know, they just don't. I mean, most of our cars are inside, so, you know, that whole weather factor isn't going to enter into it, but they don't weather well. And whether you're talking about storing it in a building, storing it in a garage, whatever, they like to be used, and it's just, you know, we see stuff all the time. So, any other questions?
You mentioned changing the engine oil at the beginning of every season. What about the gearbox and the axle?
You can certainly do that, although I think, you know, to me, the engine oil is more important. Not that the others aren't important. I'm just saying that certainly the engine oil should be changed. I mean, and you know, maybe every 2 or 3 years, change the gearbox, depends on what transmission you have. Certainly change the gearbox, change the rear, but I don't think it has to be done every year. But I think...
Yeah, the thing is, when the engine's running, you're generating, because of the fuel, you're generating an acid. Basically, sulfuric acid from the residual sulfur to the fuel. That's what's breaking down the oil, and that's what's damaging the internals of the engine. You don't have that in the gearbox. So that's the recommendation for changing engine oil every year. You get that acid out of there, you put fresh stuff in, and the differential, I mean, those are more moisture problem than anything else. So those additives aren't going to break down as quickly.
I've read about the old cars with solid lifters using zinc additives in the oil.
We use Brad Penn here, which is a oil that's formulated to use on older cars with the camshafts and lifters and stuff. There is, you could put ZDDP in your car. It's an additive. A lot of people sell it. I will caution you that, and here again, I'm not an oil guy, but the newer oils are designed to scrub that stuff out of your car. So if you put a bottle of ZDP in there and you're using brand new oil that's designed to work with a catalytic converter, it's going to scrub some of that stuff out of there, so you're not going to get the benefit. You're not going to realize the benefit.
They find it in a lump in the oil pan.
So, you know, you have to be careful, and you know, Brad Penn or whatever oil. I mean, a lot of people sell this stuff. So, but I think it's worth it for these cars to use the right type of oil in them, and you just want to be careful. And But that's the thing I threw out there about ZDP. It's great, but the newer oils will scrub that out.
How often would you recommend changing the coolant? How long will that last?
I would say a couple of years. I would, coolant will go bad over time, and it'll actually solidify in your cooling system. So we just had that TR4 that's sitting over there. Of course, he didn't use his car for 10 or I don't know how many years it was, probably 20 years. But so we're taking the engine apart, and it was solid. The antifreeze had literally solidified in the car. So the radiator was solid. The thermostat housing and stuff was just solid. The hose going from the neck of the radiator to the block was solid. In fact, there's a picture that'll come up on the screen, and you don't anticipate that, but if you, it will. It goes bad over a period of time. So I would say years. It's something you want to look at. You can. I don't know whether you maybe test it, but I think I would certainly do that every maybe 3 years, 2 years, something like that. It's cheap insurance, the way I look at it. It's a gallon of antifreeze is like $12 or whatever. Most of us are going to use the green antifreeze anyway, so that's pretty simple stuff. Any other questions? Go ahead. Jim.
Yeah, I suggest you commented about looking under the car. Those of us that have cars with electric fuel pumps in particular, cars have been sitting all winter long. When you go to start the car in spring, have somebody, your wife's around or a friend, somebody look under the car when you turn the key on, let the fuel pump run. Or don't try to start the car until you hear the fuel pump shut off.
Yeah.
Because you can pump a pretty big puddle or gasoline under the car before you try to start it.
Well, the other thing is, I'm sure you've seen this, the ethanol in the fuel attacks the rubber fuel lines. So most of our cars have a couple different connectors between the tank and the carburetors, and even so the carburetors themselves. And even like that TD out there, there's a rubber fuel line, but it has stainless, what do you call it, a cover over it. Well, it doesn't mean that the fuel line inside that is not going to go bad, which that one did. But I mean, that's a great point, because a lot of us would just get in there and the ethanol dries out the rubber, which is going to crack. Now you have a leak, you turn the car on, and you're pumping gas on the floor, and then you're going to want to know where the fire extinguisher is.
Fire in the engine compartment, but now the car's in the house.
Yeah.
Which is why I always start mine outside the driveway.
So that's why you
push it outside first.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point. I'm just trying to think. Beth, did you think we're ready?
No, I'm waiting for the Z to be delivered, but I have the drawing,
Oh, okay, yeah.
so.
We're gonna, this is when we do our giveaway, and this is part about the Pocono timeshare.
Did you sell any?
This is my granddaughter Ella. Oh, Ed. How you doing there? That's going to be my future son's father-in-law. So we're just one big happy family here. So Ella is going to, we've got two giveaways here today. We have a wash bucket. It has some little trinkets in there and stuff. So we're gonna pick out a number. Ella's gonna do the number deal. And you can pick between that, and we're going to give away a Dan Masters book, which is, I really don't want to see that on eBay.
I just figure if somebody has it, then they might not want that or not.
Yeah. So, but my choice would be the book. But as I said before, that the Dan Masters book is great. It works for any car, so it doesn't really matter. Okay, so Ella's going to pick a number.
Does everybody have a number?
Does everybody have a number?
get one? Okay.
Who doesn't have a number?
Oh. Here you go. Hold on.
An extra? Okay, yeah, thanks.
Okay, so you need a number.
You need a number, hold on.
I can give you the one.
Hey, Bob! Hold on one second. Hey, Bob, do you have a number that can go, somebody didn't get a number.
Who are the number guys? I'll have to talk to them.
Yeah, second, entire numbers.
I have, just a real quick side note, I have a picture of Ella. How old are you? We had a